Today we're going to talk about something I've always wanted to talk about, but for some reason took a long time until I made this, is that concept of pip control. Pip control or pip management is the idea that being very purposeful with the color of pips in our spells and how we design our decks. And usually this actually just comes down to the types of interaction that we play, but it can touch upon everything. So let's talk about that a little bit. But let's talk about what inspired me into thinking about this. A while back, when I started playing competitive Commander, I played Niv Mizzet Parun. So Niv Mizzet Parun is really powerful control deck, I think. You can play reactively very well. It pings things whenever you play a piece of interaction, replaces itself when someone wants to answer something. It lets you draw a card. So Niv Mizzet Parun is kind of like the control player's dream, or one of the dream commanders. But unfortunately, as most Niv players know, the greatest challenge of that deck is the commander's almost prohibitive casting cost. Even in a two-color deck, triple red, triple blue, is just very, very hard to get very quickly because we rely a lot on colorless mana. So for example, Sol Ring, Mana Crypt, Mana Vault, Grim Monolith, what else? Like Thran, Dynamo, you get the idea. We basically rely on colorless mana a lot if we want to accelerate. Now, of course, there are also things like Arcane Signet, Izzet Signet, blah 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 blah, all that stuff, talismans. But colorless mana is a big source of resources that we draw on to play spells in Commander because they're just generally one of the best sources of mana acceleration for us to do things faster. So what? That means some pretty interesting things. Let's think about our pace of play or our game plan for a second. We want to resolve a Niv Mizzet, and we want to have mana open to potentially interact and do more things. We probably will be playing Force of Will or whatever in a Niv Mizzet deck, but you might not be, right? What happens if you don't play Free Interaction or you just don't have a Fierce Guardianship or Force of Will while you have a Niv Mizzet in play, and you have like a couple lands out, right? That means our interaction has to be very, very slim on the pips, the colored pips it has, because we are probably starving for colored pips. So this means that a Swan Song or Dispel is much better than a counterspell in a Niv Mizzet deck. This is also just generally true, but that does not mean that we can't play interaction that is more than one. So what I'm getting at here is that if we want to play things like Sol Ring and Mana Crypt, we can actually play high mana value interaction that is low on pips but high on colorless costs, because we want to play Sol Ring and Mana Crypt. We should. It's good. But there's going to be cycles where we don't really use that colorless mana a lot because a lot of the spells is just going to eat up all our colored pips. So what this ultimately means is that our interaction suite is actually going to be pretty interesting, where we can have cheap 1 mana interaction and then potentially 2 or 3 mana interaction that uses those colorless pips casting costs. This includes things like Negate actually might be just better than Counterspell in a Niv Mizzet deck. This is probably a super hot take right now, and we're gonna be like, Rebel, how dare you say Negate is better than Counterspell? But Negate can be better than Counterspell because it's just easier potentially to cast in a Niv deck if we're going to use colorless mana, or it just gives us more flexibility in the casting cost. The casting cost is something that I really focus on when I design my Commander decks. Another example of a good card to play in a Niv Mizzet deck is Fiery Cannonade. In most cases, you would think that spell doesn't look very good, but because our deck is less likely to use our colorless sources, because all our other spells are going to be eating up all our colored sources or colored pips, it doesn't matter that Fiery Cannonade costs 2 colors actually, because we're most likely going to have the 2 colorless from our rocks to then use this. So effectively, all we care about is the 1 red. So that's kind of a really long-winded way of explaining how I arrived to the focus on pip management or pip design. And how does this impact your deck design? Well, when you're just curating your list in general for your spells, you can think about the game plan that you want to have with your commander, with the permanents you're playing. And this doesn't have to be competitive commander. This can be any power level, really. Probably competitive. If you're gonna think this deeply into pip management, I'm pretty sure you're gonna be playing pretty high power. But I don't know. Maybe you just want to make a more streamlined deck. So how does this matter? This matters because you can do things like looking at your land base, looking at your interaction, looking at all the cards you're playing, and thinking and considering like, well, if a lot of my permanents are white, let's say in an Azorius deck or blue-white deck, that means your blue is going to be your interaction color. But it can be the other way around too. Even like that sounds pretty obvious. But if you went the other way around, you happen to be playing a lot of blue permanents, now you know that your white actually could be your color of interaction. This means that your deck might not want to play Counterspell actually, and you might want to play Swords to Plowshares, like Disenchant, other white base interaction that isn't, quite as much of a catch-all as blue, but you're gonna be spending your blue anyways playing your, I don't know, your Merfolk or whatever deck you have, because if your deck wants to spend the blue, tap down the blue at sorcery speed, that means you need to leave your white open for interaction. But it doesn't have to be this way too, it can be a mix. This is why cards like Drown in the Loch or Dovin's Veto actually could be good, depending on the deck you're building. So if your deck wants to have an equal spread of things, you probably naturally want to fetch for both colors or all the colors you need in your deck. So Drown in the Loch, Dovin's Veto is actually easier to cast in oftentimes multicolored decks, especially 3-color decks, than Counterspell in big color decks. I think we explained pip management pretty well, or pretty exhaustively now. In general, it's just the idea of looking at the pips you have, thinking about the land base you have, thinking about the game plan you have, and then curating the cards you have in your deck, following the game plan that you want to have, so that you maximize your ability to play those cards easily with your land base. There we go. We said it somewhat succinctly and clearly, which is a win. It's a win for me. Alright, go manage your pips. Go take apart your decks. Bye. Oh, don't forget, subscribe.